There we go. All right, there we go. And we're here. All right, and we got it. I figured it out. I clicked enough buttons and things started working. Let me do a refresh here.
Yeah, we're good. Good to go.
Yeah, we're good. Cool beans.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So, sorry, where was I? I was about right. So we're talking about lust, right? So interesting topic, lust. You hear it about a lot if you go to church. Are you a churchgoer yourself, Lewis?
Not
or
me.
no?
No.
Okay, not explicitly. Fair enough. I know I talk my pastor and the elders of my church. They talk about it a lot. They talk about lust, but they've never really fundamentally defined lust. This is why I ended up digging into this concept. Lust itself is, at its very core, it requires attraction.
Mhm.
I am aware of this, right? We know that lust itself, fundamentally at its core, requires some semblance of attraction, right? And one of the interesting things about it is there's also an element of, from the biological perspective, there's that dopamine kick that kicks into your brain when you deal with attraction and you see something or someone that is attractive. Your brain kicks and then it turns into, and then what it does is it fogs the mind, right? There's a fundamental fog. You kind of lose focus on whatever else it is you're doing. It's like a set of blinders gets thrown on your face, and you're kind of stuck into this like, oh, I see that, right? And it's interesting in that, in and of itself, you would think is at its core is an innocent thing, right? Genuine attraction would be a fundamentally innocent thing, and it's a precursor to love. But what happens when it's taken to its absolute extreme, or is perceived as the love itself? Right.
Okay.
And that is the shadow of love, right? Which is that extreme, that is obsession, right? You see people that deal with attraction to the form of obsession. That's manifest in stalking, right?
Yep.
Manifests itself in stalking. Following, it's that, I guess stalking really kind of hits the gamut of behaviors, because the behaviors are, following into major forums, asking people that know them about them, right? Yep. Observing from a distance that really negative degenerative behavior that causes people to act in a manner. For example, in America, we had a recent story that popped up. There was a boy here in the US that was shot and killed by the dad of a TikTok star, a TikTok influencer. She's like 14 years old, and this guy was like stalking her.
Stalking her.
Yes, he was literally stalking her, and you could see the obvious consequences of negative behavior such as that. And and the dad took it out by saying, like, no, you're going to get away from my kid. Shoots him in the chest with a shotgun. Like, it's crazy. Kills the guy. It's absolutely insane. That this is lust to me. This is what I have observed to be lust.
It can also go a bit further than that. So you can end up going into, it starts off as stalking, but then there's usually an aim inside of that. Thereby, obviously, it's like, oh, I can get a kisser if I follow and know everything about her, but long enough, right?
Yes,
something like that. I think it plays out slightly differently with women. So I don't know. I can't speak to that. But in regards to it, it can devolve further into fetishism. I pronounced that wrong.
Fetishism, yeah.
Into a fetish about something that you're specifically doing, and then you're involved in addiction at that point. But that's a little bit outside the scope of this conversation here.
Well, interestingly enough, one of the most addictive substances to the human body is actually our own dopamine processing, right? So at its fundamental core, it does become an addiction. It has to be, right? It has to be the logical conclusion of that behavior, right? Is fundamentally an addiction to something that repeatedly kicks on the dopamine processors in the brain.
It's also to do with your endocrine system as well.
Yeah.
So you've also got your serotonin levels that get messed with, and then I can't remember the other chemicals, the other parts in your brain. But it's not just dopamine. Dopamine is what makes you want to have the cake. I'm using that as a metaphor, obviously. Right? That's what makes you drive to get it. But then when you actually get it, the dopamine shuts down. And then you get other chemicals that then come in. So like you have your serotonin, for example. But again, there's other ones I don't recall that come in. But in regards to lust, it is essentially, in its absolute form, sexual perversion.
Yes.
That's really what it is. It starts out as, oh, I'm following this last that I really like, and then it gets worse and worse and worse because you're not.
Yep.
Because again, it's that shadow form that you mentioned there. That'd be akin to that'd be from like Jung, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Jungian. Yeah. It's the
Jungian
Jungian. It's
psychology.
Jungian. Peterson talks about it a lot, right? The
Yeah.
Jungian shadow versus the light, and you're dealing with like the dark side of the same behavior. And you would say, well, does lust itself fundamentally have a light side? Well, at its very core, in order for a relationship to last long term, there still always has to be that element of desire, and desire has to still fundamentally drive the relationship to seek constant connection. And I wanted to run some lyrics by you, actually, which I'm curious if you would. This recently popped up as a very famous song. This actually popped up here in the US. It's actually was released in February. I'm actually going to share my screen here. I'm going to share my screen. Let me figure this out here real quick. Window. Have you ever? So you know who Harry Styles is, correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this song popped into one of my feeds. At least part of the algorithm popped this song into my feeds, and I heard the song, and the song is terribly catchy. But I wanted to dive into the lyrics to see what he's talking about, because the essence of it is supposed to be a message of love. But what is sad about this song is there is elements of regret to it, but it seems almost superficial at the very core. Now, if you can read the lyrics, do you see what I'm talking about here? In this world, it's just us, right? There's a superficial. This is the big chorus. This is the big chorus here for it, and you could see almost the superficiality of it.
It's not the same as it was in this world. It's just us. You know, it's not okay.
Yeah, and that's it.
It's not the same as it was. Well, that's regret.
Yes, that is but it's interesting that it's a love song that mentions the sadness of past reflection, right? Which is a really interesting thing. This comes off as almost weirdly super, because when you first listen to it, you think you're dealing with a love song, because the actual music video itself seems to be a connection between two people holding, like, revolving around each other, and the relationship only seems to revolve around them and doesn't have anything else involved. There's no externality to it.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting thing, because then it comes into this message of regret, but it seems superficial because it's fundamentally a subjective perception of a relationship, right? And so I was curious what you thought about this. This thing, I think, is popping up pretty big here in the US. This is like a big US one. If you had any comments on it.
Not really. I don't tend to listen to a lot of this sort of music, but I get what you're saying, that there's a regretful tone in the lyrics. I get that. And I think that really just reflects on the culture as it is now.
Yes.
That gets into the discussion of, does art reflect life, or does life reflect art? Obviously.
Right.
Somebody might say that it's like how memes work, is that they actually change how you perceive life, and then that creates new art that then changes your perception, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So maybe that's what this is doing. It's just reflecting what is actually currently happening, basically. But it's trying to be happy about it, but at the same time, that you can't have actual happiness in a song. You can't force it.
Yeah.
You can't force it to be like that. Much like a relationship, you can't force a relationship to work.
It has to be organic, not artificial.
Correct.
That's a very key problem with relationships too, is there is too much attempt at artificiality, and this is very obvious with influencer culture here in the US anyways. I don't know how bad it is how bad or good it is in Britain, but in the US, everything is fundamentally artificial when viewed through the lens of media, specifically social media. Yeah. And most relationships are fundamentally artificial because there is no daily processing of what's actually going on in the relationship. You don't see whether or not the two people in the relationship are complementary or if they're antagonistic. And that's a key fundamental element of love too, right? Love does require some element of complement to
It
actually genuinely
does.
create a whole, because then it allows then they can come to terms with the sacrifices they need to make to bring it together, which is one of the key themes of sacrifice.
But
I can use.
it does also require some form of antagonism for one to essentially push the other one further. Do you get what I'm saying with that?
If you want to dive into that, I'm down to hear. I'm
You
actually.
can't if all you've got in a relationship is two people that 100% complement each other, you tend to see that those relationships don't always work out either. Oh, they're perfect for each other, but those relationships don't always work out because then there's no antagonism, right? So in that case, it means that both parties are very placid to each other. They don't actually engage. They're
Oh,
like
I
it's like a mirror image, but one's male,
yes.
one's female. But that doesn't.
I called that commonality. So I called that relationship commonality. That's the way I've
Right.
observed that. It's when two people are like, oh yeah, they share so many things in common that they don't actually have any sense of driving the best out of each other
Correct.
because they fundamentally ride the same path. I call that excessive commonality, as opposed to a complementary, which is, filling in each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah,
And it
but
allows the
you
two of
need
you
to
to
be antagon
grow.
you need some form of antagonism to do that.
Fair enough.
You need
Yeah, I
some.
figure I see what you're saying. So it's like the antagonism would be like, well, I see you aren't really good at doing this thing, so I'm going to keep, bugging you about doing this thing to
Yeah.
bring the best out of you. And that's that antagonist. That's that
That's
confrontation. That's the conflict that's
yeah.
necessary to help
It would be
bring the
like
best and rise.
your wife or your mother getting
Yeah.
on at your father or you for oh you haven't like gone outside and done the bins or you haven't I thought you said you were going to get the fencing done. Oh, I thought you were going to get the go with your uncle to go
Yes.
get the car sorted because it needs new wheels or brakes or whatever. I thought you were going to insert
Yeah.
whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
That's that antagonism to get you to go get off your ass and go do what you said you were going to do.
Exactly. And it's sad because it's actually like here in the US we call that nagging. Like, and we view it as a negative trait as opposed to a genuine positive trait, because
Positive trait, yeah.
it's very easy to get stuck in a rut and not push or move forward.
Correct. Yes. In regards to that would be actual love because you're not saying it out of malice. You're not saying it out of any negative uh, aggression to the person
Yeah.
that you don't like them. You're doing it because you actually want them to do what they said they were going to do, and it would actually benefit them if they
Yep.
actually, see it
It's
through. Which, funnily enough, it would then reinforce the light side of lust.
yes, yes. Yeah, you're talking about sort of the attraction elements
The
of lust,
attraction,
which is like
yeah.
yeah. Because
So
it drives you to realize the necessity of the two to complete the whole in the relationship,
yeah,
right? That's it. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I actually really like that. It's
gonna write it down.
yeah, it's actually a really good point. I actually really like that. And then and then there's the elements of sacrifice within love, right? We know that love
Yeah,
always has elements of sacrifice. It's the same thing with a parent versus a child, that the child doesn't really owe the parent much anything, which is why it's interesting when there are certainly they make for good story in film, right? But there are those parents in film. They demand that I deserve this because I brought you into the world. It's like, no, 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 no. They didn't have the choice to be brought in, which is why you have to sacrifice everything for them. It's not
yeah,
about you, it's about them. And that's that at the very core. That's another positive element of love as opposed to a negative
it
element
is.
of love, which is an
But it's
interesting one.
smothering.
Yes.
The shadow form of love would be smothering. So that'd be not Bill Mayer. I can't remember. Late night talk show host
Bill
in the
Maher.
US, Bill Maher. Thank you.
Yeah.
He did a piece on his show many years ago obviously in the US about what was it? Helicopter parents. That's
Yes.
how
I can
he
actually find
called it.
that.
You can find that and pull it up. So he did this bit about helicopter parents where that is essentially a form of love, but it's negative. because you're smothering your child, or your relative or whoever it is, right? Whoever you're doing it for, you're smothering them. So you're not actually allowing them, you're not giving them anything that allows them to then grow. So it's like having a plant and you know, I want to keep you safe and make sure you're all right and nothing ever goes wrong to you, but then you kill the plant in the process.
Yes.
In
All
the
right,
case
here
of
we
a
go.
human, you end up creating this very warped individual that can't operate in any functional manner in society.
So anecdotal evidence for me, I knew a person in the military. She actually couldn't really function without people doing things for her because like her dad did absolutely everything. And when she was given responsibility, she would get about 5 to 10 minutes in whatever responsibility, just have a complete mental breakdown and just couldn't function like a normal person. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about, is you're talking about that the excess to the point of, it's the word, it's really just fundamentally incompetency because there's no learned skills, there's no capabilities, no capacities.
There's no, from a previous stream, there's no tacit knowledge that person has for whatever it is. They don't have any.
Yes.
And there is a problem with that, because most of your tacit knowledge that you learn will be when you're younger, not when you're older. Again, like that's to do with like neural plasticity of the mind. As you get older, you become more set in your ways, for example. So it means it's not that you can't learn, it's just that it's very difficult and it's very labor intensive, I should say.
Yes.
As you get older, to learn new things or to relearn something, as you might say.
All right. So I'm going to play the video and then we can have a discussion on this one too here.
It's very quiet.
Oh. Yes, for me it's loud, so I don't know that I can't really put the volume up anymore other than through 1 second. Here we go. Let me do this. It'll start to become loud for me. I can't really put the volume. Is that better?
It's up to whatever you've done.
I'm sorry?
It's gone up, but it's still quite muffled.
Okay. Yeah, I'm upping my total volume for my output here, so.
I think it's because it's running through your headset for some reason.
Oh, that's odd. It shouldn't be doing that. Okay. Yeah, I guess I can't really get it to. That's unfortunate. Yeah. Yeah, I'm reading you, Keo. Woo. All right. I guess we'll figure this out eventually. I don't know how Ralph got it to work perfectly.
Where's Ralph? Where's the tech guy when you need?
I know when you need. I know, and it's funny because I'm a tech guy, right? And I'm sitting here like I really don't do the software, the presentation portion of like tech. I'm mostly IT, or mostly infrastructure. I'm mostly hardware background.
Right, I see. Are you sharing this screen?
Yeah, I'm trying to share the screen.
Try it as a video file.
Try it as a video file?
Yeah, try that.
No. True, I guess we can do that. Oh, no, that's like an actual saved video file. That's unfortunate. A Microsoft Edge tab. I guess we can try this. Helicopter parenting. I guess we can try it this way. And then let's see if this changes.
Always on the case.
Oh, banging.
Just there.
Got it. I figured it out.
Only get them to work for the Secret Service. So, this topic has been much in the news lately because there are now families going against the grain who want to raise their children, guided by the radical concept of occasionally letting them out of their sight. A movement that has been dubbed free-range parenting. Or as we used to call it, parenting. Actually, we didn't even call it that because parenting wasn't a word, because being a parent wasn't a job description. In the 70s, parenting meant you woke up, went to your kid's room. If they were alive, you were done for the day.
It's got some interesting points there.
Crib monitors? Why? What are they going to do? Turn into werewolves in the middle of the night? But that's not how most parents see it these days. And there have been cases of free-range parents running up against the law. A couple in Silver Spring, Maryland, has twice had their kids, 10 and 6, picked up by the cops for walking home alone from the park, which is all of 2 blocks away. Geez, I walked farther than that to school every day when I was a kid that age and nobody cared. In fact, my mother always looked a little disappointed when I came back.
He has an interesting point there.
I mean, what kind of country do we live in where the sight of a kid walking alone in his own neighborhood requires a call to 911? Were these kids being chased by a clown with his dick out?
You see, but
Yeah,
I think just as a minor point, there's something that's quite interesting with this, which is again, it's out of the scope of the point to do with love and lust. Apart, is that even this was in 2015.
Yeah.
Has there actually been any change from what he's describing here? From what he's describing, has there been a change away from this helicopter parenting?
You could argue not really. In fact, it's almost gotten worse because there is elements of parents addressing the notion of, well, yes and no. Certainly, I know here in the US, and this is mostly US anecdotal evidence, but for example, we have parents here in the US that are combating and fighting the schooling system because the schooling system seems to be almost allergic to adversity, but declaring that you are only in the position you are because other people are levying adversity upon you. For example, right, the distinction between yeah, that too. Yeah, that one. Yep. Keo's got that point in chat. There's also the ones where, you know, they talk about, for example, when you're dealing with, you know, black versus whites in the US, right? You're only living in a poor school because whites are oppressing you. But we're going to do everything.
Stuff.
Yes, this is part of that CRT behavior, right? You can see that specifically, and that's a weird form of helicopter parenting, but parenting from the state, right? So from above, and this is that type shadow of like, we want to masquerade as that which we love you, and we're gonna and we love you so much that we're gonna tell you that these people are doing bad things to you, and you should be bad, and you should be mad at them for that.
And then this again goes into another thing that's outside of this.
Yes, outside of the scope, and I'm doing
out of the scope of this discussion again, which is to do with responsibility, which is that a lot of people don't want to be the ones responsible for anything.
Yes, there's that application of responsibility.
Which to me is again trying to tie it in. To me, would be the negative or the shadow form of love again, which is that you state, "I love you," but you have no actual sense of responsibility with that goes along with that statement.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah, and especially shadow form. Like, what's another form of? Because we know that some of the shadows of things like lust is obsession. Obsession is a shadow.
Yeah.
Envy is a shadow.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, a light form of love is actually jealousy. Weirdly enough, because jealousy actually has interesting positive behaviors. Jealousy tends to drive emulation, and you emulate the behaviors of someone you are jealous of. For example, jealous women, right, would emulate behavior of women that seem to be more sexually successful, right?
Yeah,
and that's what jealousy fundamentally is, and that's actually a light shadow of. Interestingly enough, that's another light form, which is that emulation as opposed to destruction behavior. So you want to emulate what it is, you want to become that which is successful as opposed to destroy that which is successful.
Well, this thing that's perfect, because then what's happened obviously is that there's been an inversion for it. So instead of it being jealousy, it's actually envy, which is destructive, but that's what's emphasized as being good.
Yes, that jealousy,
and that's where you then get like things like TikTok and all this other crap.
Yes, yeah.
Which promotes envious behavior, not jealousy, not I'll emulate this person, which then eventually might make you go, oh, I don't need this thing. You toss it away. But instead of what you do is it makes you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper down into it. You're trying to emulate somebody that in of themselves on the surface look fine, deep down they're miserable.
Yeah, it's a mask. It's a superficial mask of what's that? You would call it a clone, right? It's a superficial mask of a clone and copy behavior.
It's a simulacrum.
Yes, that's the word. I knew the word, and I couldn't. It wasn't stick. It was not in my head there for a second. I'm sitting there like, I know this word. Yeah, it is. It's a simulacrum, right? And you can see that behavior very visible. And it's, when you're dealing with articles that talk about like, oh, well, do you love this person? And it's like, no, what you're actually describing is obsession. It's physical obsession and obsession. Yes.
It's lost.
Yes. Absolutely.
Well, you can see this within. I remember mentioning, this is anecdotal. I remember my brother quite likes 90s music, less so now, but that's only because he was looking at it was on the TV, and he had like, it was a compilation of like the hit singles like for each year or something like that, right? And it came to the 90s, and I asked him just to pause it for like a minute. And I said to him, just pay attention to like these hit singles, what they're talking about. There were music videos that went with it, what they're actually doing in the music video, and then notice what specifically like they are actually doing. So there's the video itself, but then it's what they're doing in the video as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he immediately started grinning because he knew immediately, oh, drugs, sex, guns. I'll be quite blunt and say bitches.
Yep.
Right. Essentially, I got my drugs, guns, bitches, and money. Right.
True.
Like how rappers are usually stereotyped.
Oh my gosh! Don't even get me started on rap culture here in the U.S. Like I can have a whole topic about rap culture in the U.S. rap culture and how rap culture itself is also manifesting across the pond in England.
Yes,
English rap culture, yeah, and it fundamentally fills in the lowest class of society to engage in violent behavior and do the worst elements of human behavior.
And it's called in the UK. It's called drill.
Drill. Never heard that.
So that's one of them. Drill. Well, because you've got Rastamanini. Yeah, you've got Rastas from. Again, this is going outside of the topic of the discussion again, but
I'm pretty bad at that, so you'll have to forgive me.
Just it's all right, but it's just briefly. So you've got the Rastas as Caribbeans, and you've got some Africans as well. You've got basically African style beats that are used in the music, and it's very fast. If you ever listen to any of it, I can't remember the stuff that Stormzy. I can't remember the genre that he is part of. It's not drill, it's something else, but it's very quick with the words, very, very quick, a lot faster than American rap. As even lyricist, even like sort of lyricists in the US rap music scene, the stuff in the UK is faster, the way that you say it.
That's crazy, because like Chicago style rap is like really fast. If you've ever heard like Chicago style, like that's really, really fast rap. They're just they're throwing words out there. But like again, yeah, you're right. We're getting a little off topic on this, but yeah, you could see sort of these like type shadows really manifested in like, for example, like the way rap tends to portray itself, and it portrays the negative form of lust, right, which is just physical attraction and desire, and it's all superficial. And it doesn't carry any real depth or meaning to it. And it's just about the sex. Yeah.
Gold chains, a low rider, got women in the back. I'm doing blunts.
Yeah.
And that's the lowest common denominator. No, it's all right. It's lowest.
That's the word. That's what I was going to say. It is. It's lowest common denominator behavior. And that is an unfortunate side effect of, you break down, you remove the most important parts of the human condition, which is God, right? You start to remove God from the equation, and it starts to drill itself down all the way to the lowest common denominator and the lowest elements, which tends to just be the superficial.
Yes, even if you weren't to emphasize God as that position, right, and you were just to look at it in a purely material sense, just for the sake of argument, right? And then you look at what are you deriving the authority from?
Mhm.
What are the moral positions that you derive the authority from? Because if it's not something that's above,
Mhm.
then it becomes the lowest common denominator. It has to be something that's very high up, almost impossible to achieve, but it's still worth the effort to attempt to achieve it.
Yes. Yes,
Whereas
it's the
go on.
I was going to say it's I was trying to find a poetic version, poetic way of saying it, but it's accepting the mediocrity, that the mediocrity should be at least have a decent standard. It's a decent
Yeah,
standard of mediocrity as opposed to the lowest common denominator mediocrity.
yeah. But
Right. So and
the lowest stuff sells more.
yeah,
That's just a given. Anyone can tell you that.
yeah, it's basic instinct, right? It just fulfills a singular you could say an
Drive, a
alchemical
pulse.
desire. Yeah. It's an alchemical desire, right? Because it kicks on the primitive parts of the brain, and it abuses that to the point of where it's, like you said earlier, it's a drug addiction.
Ugh, monkey me like women.
Exactly. That's what it is.
Like, it's very basic, but it has no standard. There's no actual standard there.
Yeah.
There
You're
isn't a
right. And
standard. And that again is love and lust, and there is that position, that difference between the two, because even the light side of lust is still not great.
yeah, it's still superficial at best, really. It's still an element of really just desire and passion, but even desire and passion don't really fundamentally drive one to something such as sacrifice, right? It's
No,
not
it
the
doesn't,
same
no.
as like genuine love tends to manifest itself in sacrifice and the giving and the destruction of oneself to become something beyond what oneself was originally was.
So
And
essentially, if you're looking at, like, for example, Plato and how he talked about it regarding eros, there's a lot of people that would today say that if you to, I have actually uttered this to some people before, and they said, "Oh, it's a bit homosexual." You're saying that, like, they did, because
yeah,
the perception of what it is completely removed from what that used to be understood as. I think Ralph might even, if I said it with Ralph, he'd probably say the exact same thing. He probably would. Oh,
Yeah.
my gaydar's going off some rubbish like this. Essentially, it would be where men in combat can have a love for each other, right? And that sounds, immediately when you say
It's
that, it
brotherhood.
sounds, that's what you would classify brotherhood as. But that's love, but it's not lust.
Yes, correct. There is
It's
that.
not.
Yeah, it's the transcendent form of respecting someone to the point
Yes.
of sacrifice, because that's really, there's a fundamental, or an admiration. Actually, I think admiration really hits the point there, right? It's admiration to the point of sacrifice.
Yes.
Because there has to be the sense of there's the willingness to be gone in the favor of something existing beyond you.
Yeah.
And that requires elements of admiration. Now I can pull up the definition for admiration here, just so I'm a little bit more.
So in regards to
clear on this.
So actually doing that, in regards to Plato, he mentioned eros, and eros is, if I remember correctly, it's a cosmic. I think it's Greek for love, but it's to do with, like, a cosmic deity, essentially. And he believed that it was one of the highest forms that man can achieve. This is obviously back when he was alive, obviously.
Yeah.
Because it was because the only way that you could achieve true love, which is usually where it's like, I found my true love, that sort of thing, right? It's where you've overcome the literal physical material desire of lust. You no longer lust. So if you're in a relationship, you don't actually lust after your wife. It might appear like that, but you don't.
Yeah.
The entire point is that it's that you just want to be with them in a non-sexual manner, and it's that is difficult to get. It is difficult.
Yes.
Because it's like, yes, I want to hug her and kiss her, but not sexually want to shag her.
You're right.
That's difficult to, like, as an idea is one, difficult to understand, but it's even harder to actually, if you were to try and do that, is even harder.
Yes, and this even occurs with, oh man, I was on a point there too. This really occurs. Yeah, I was there, and then my brain farted, so I just forgot where I was going with that.
You were
No,
pulling something up.
So I originally pulled up admiration, right? So admiration has something. So there's essentially three definitions for it. It's a noun, so it's respect and warm approval. So that's what I was talking about, admiration, because there is a genuine respect, and this manifests itself in honor, but that's a different cultural topic as well. There is a sense of honor that goes into something like battle, right? Where you're going into, you're doing something like you're going into battle, and you admire your brothers for going into such an insanely brave and random situation, such as a melee. Right, which is, it's because you got to think about the violence of war and the absolute random nature of war, that you don't really have a lot of control of what's happening around you. You really don't, right? And you're kind of at the whim of whatever happenstance circumstances come to you, right? So there is a genuine admiration, which is why there's that element of sacrifice. That's why because there is understanding sort of that transcendent nature of things like bravery and honor that tend to surpass even the material itself, to the point where it's fundamentally something that's inherent to the soul. Yes. So this is why it's like very important. And liberals have tried. That's where I was going. So, and liberals, certainly at the beginning of liberal thinking back in the 18th century, had tried to understand and tackle. You were having a discussion about this earlier too, about sort of the godless nature of liberals and understanding where the logical conclusion of some of their ideas was actually going with purely realist and purely material worldviews.
Yes. Yeah.
And this manifested. I remember reading a writer in the 18th century was talking about, well, we have to be careful about removing God, and we have to find something to replace it. And they tried to replace it with love, but they described love in a manner that ended up being sort of the shadow of that type of lust, which ended up becoming a purely material construct of the perception of what caring and admiration and genuine emulation of someone actually
peace and
is.
love, man.
Yeah. All right. Do we have anything else for this topic? Because otherwise we can move on to the second half.
In regards to so in Old English, it pronounced Luffian. I think that's how you pronounce it. Luffian. Is to feel love. This is a verb, so this isn't the noun of love. This is as you use it as like a doing word. This is what you would actually do if you're in love. This is what you do. To feel love for, cherish. Cherish, show love to, delight in, or approve.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah. So when you actually do it, you're cherishing somebody's company.
Yes, that's a really good way to put it too. That's actually a pretty succinct. It's interesting how modern English has sort of lost its depth.
I'm just looking here. I think it's because it's based itself purely on the noun for the word. So the noun is in Old English is lufu. So the words love were actually separate, obviously in Old English. Luffian is the actual act of love, but love as like a noun is lufu, which is feeling of love, romantic sexual attraction, affection, friendliness, the love of God, love of an abstraction or personification. That's where I think that's what people probably think. And in German, it means joy. So, I'm just enjoying myself. But it's not love.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I think we kind of broached the topic from multiple angles there. I actually really like that. That was pretty good. So we can move on to like something else I wanted to discuss, which is positive cultural vision of the right, and genuinely creating a point by point document system that essentially can be, hey, no, this is what we genuinely believe and we know to be true, because it really has to approach it from axioms, right? So at the
Right.
very core, what does any society really functionally want? What's the first axiom, right? The first axiom is we want to have trust, because trust allows for shared values to be built, right? At the very core of it all, right? So there has to be, so it's like we desire a high trust society, right? Would be point one. And then point two would be something along the lines of a consistent worldview or a consistent frame that allows us to drive interpretation of the world around us. If you have anything you wanted to add to that, or if any disagreements you would have with those kinds of positions, I'm all ears.
I don't have anything to add to that first bit.
Right? It's kind of hard to sort of disagree with the notion of, we would want a high trust society. It's incredible too, because there is an interesting problem with trust in society right now. Certainly from the American perspective. Again, I don't know about England.
It's pretty much the same. I actually had my I went out last night with two of my mates. One of them's in the Home Office, working for the government, essentially, Whitehall, and he's fully aware of like these problems. He was a little bit more enthusiastic about it when he started, and now it's been like 2 years now. He seems very jaded already, and he's the same age with me, about all of just the shit that you have to fucking put up with and listen to about it all. And he's fully aware, and he agrees with what I'm saying. It's just that as he currently is in the system, you can't change anything from where he is or from where his perspective is. He doesn't see how do you change that?
True. Yeah, it's a tough one, because it's interestingly enough for America, right? We have our competing elements of the narrative, right, that talk about wanting to create trust, and the perception is that trust can be driven through a material lens. Trust itself can be driven by equating the material, right? Creating material equity is what fundamentally drives trust, because trust doesn't exist so long as some guy is available to take things.
But that's not what trust is, though, is it? So they're all
No.
so they're all saying about trust this and trust that, but what does the word mean itself, though? Okay, so I'm just having a look.
Okay.
Reliance on the veracity, integrity, or other virtues of someone or something, religious faith. So help, confidence, protection, support. What else have we got? Comfort, consolation. So if you've got trust in someone, trust, fidelity, to believe, to trust, faithful, trustful, trusty, be firm, solid, steadfast, right? So, but none of the people that are in positions of power can be trusted, because they aren't steadfast.
Yes.
They'll just flip on a dime. They'll just flip to a different position. And then when you pair that with the previous discussion we just had on love and lust, it makes it even worse. Like how could you trust somebody that is talking about how, we want this idea where everyone's, more moral and they're not engaged in, depravity and lustful activities and things like this, but then they themselves do it.
Exactly. There's that hypocrisy to it, right? There's the hypocrisy. There's the proselytizing practice, like preaching but not practicing.
Correct.
And it's incredible how the left talks about forced altruism as a means of it, like literally coerced altruism to the point of trust. Like, you will trust me now because there is no reason for you to not trust me. And you go, no, actually, you're actually creating the exact opposite of what we actually want. Right. Which leads me to point number 2 as one of the fundamental foundations for creating that system of trust, which to me, now this is my position. I don't know exactly about you and your position in terms of like your relationship with God and Christ, but essentially at the core, it would be something along the lines of, we believe in a consistent worldview, a consistent common worldview. And that worldview is driven by the word of God. That's my example, right? Because the word of God is consistent. It is clear, and its moral foundations allows it to build things such as values like duty, loyalty, and through the execution of these values, you build that trust naturally, and it comes. So I don't know which one I'd like as point number one. I think point number one would probably be better suited as consistent worldview, driven by the word of God. And then number two, we believe in a high trust society, because they fundamentally feed into each other. And I would like to see the points how they feed into each other, so that they create a consistent perception of cultural vision, right? And cultural vision specifically for the future, because that is something that is certainly lost. We are so stuck in policy. We are so mired in policy and structure that we forget that at the end of the day, the government is only representative of the people that inhabit it. So if the culture is broken, the people are broken that inhabit the institutions.
Well, the government's also broken then.
Yes, absolutely. Like, and certainly in America, the government's horrendously broken, which is why we need a political path to power, because we know our positions to be correct, and we have a positive vision of the future that isn't mired in destruction and coercion and sheer unnecessary wanton violence and revolution at the very core.
If you can't ensure that people are going to be loyal to you, thereby you're ensuring a sense of trust of the people in you, then you have to use physical force. The reality might be that the system itself can't be fixed. Like, I'm not talking about this big cathedral, this lovely building that we've got here. It's like got some damage and it's a bit worn and everything. I'm talking more so about its foundations. The actual foundations that keep the building up
are rotted away.
They're already I'm going to swear then. Sorry. They're already worn. They're already damaged beyond what you could state as being repairable.
Yeah, they're shattered. They're cracked.
Yeah.
They're cracked to the point of instability, right? So it's shattered to instability is really what it's very core, because the foundations can't hold if there's too many singular distinct pieces that are attempting to hold it all together, and it becomes essentially a mess. It becomes a wobbly mess. Yeah. And then everything starts to, and all of the fringes crumble before the center does, right? Yeah. So before the central piece really crumbles, and it's an interesting problem, right? So, which is why it's very succinct that, we here in the dissident right, we talk about needing political power before we can actually address the fundamental core of the social issues, because, the right doesn't really carry social power because it doesn't control the narrative, and its narrative is fundamentally driven in the past, which is why it's important to build a positive cultural vision of the future. This is understanding. Right.
I was going to say, I had this discussion with somebody else yesterday. Sorry. It was about the moralistic fallacy, if you've heard of this one before. So the moralistic fallacy, or the moral fallacy, is, again, it's a logical fallacy where you're stating that something should be a certain way, irrespective of what currently is. So the way that I put this across to him is that's all well and good, but the entire point of the is about talking about what has happened and what is happening. So you talk, that's past and present, but the is bit isn't it doesn't go into the future. And this is obviously an issue that the right has had. Again, it's going like, we want that thing from 1950, we want that thing from insert whatever date it is, right? You're making a should claim off of a thing that has happened or was the case in the past. The problem is, when you make a should argument, you have to base it off of things that did come before, but it has to be something that goes forward. So it has to exist in the present and the future, but it can't be an immediate, it can't be a copy of the past, because that would be a simulacrum, right? And you're then running into what we were talking about earlier about love and lust, and how what you essentially have is a simulacrum. It's just a pastiche, it's fake, it's not real, right?
Absolutely.
And as a result, it's actually not as a result of that, you're not making a moral position. You're just stating, I want this thing to be like how it was back in insert date. So so it's not actually a moral position you're making. You're just wanting. It falls into nostalgia. I want it to be like that, but your nostalgia might be completely warped from how things actually worked back then.
Yeah, your frame could be built off a misinterpretation of authenticity. Oh yeah, and then it's interesting how like desiring political power could actually assist or enable sort of this cultural revival at the very core, because it's certainly people will support the strong horse. But one of the reasons I wanted to draw up this positive vision for the right is that it will genuinely create a strategic framework that is observable and can be utilized as a point by point, so sort of as a system of talking points, which I think is actually a really interesting thing. Certainly, most of the working class really can really identify and communicate in the form of talking points, which is actually kind of the point of the document itself, is it acts like a series of talking points that talks about, well, this is what we believe the future should have. So regardless on our aesthetics, regardless of the aesthetics of the past, you can look for the aesthetics, but the aesthetics never, and that's the thing, right? Is people are pointing to the past, but they want the aesthetic, but they don't understand the cultural framework that built the aesthetic.
Correct.
Right. There is a lack of understanding of the cultural framework that built, which is why building a positive vision of the future culturally is important, at least as far as I can tell, for when seeking to gain power, and you can actually get hold of that structure, you can then essentially become that manifestation of culture for the future while being the strong horse in the race. And at the very core, then it becomes emulation. Right, then you can encourage that emulation and the repetition of that emulation downstream from a position of strength, which is why having a cultural vision of the future is actually really important, at least given the current state of, like, for example, when we talk about phase 4, right? Given the current state of phase 4, it's really important, because once we get that, then we can just drop it and just say, boom, by the way, this is exactly what we believe here, which then allows those in those positions of power to start going, okay, well, we want to make sure that the word of God creates a consistent worldvie for our culture. Boom. Therefore, we're going to demand that this goes back into our schools. We're going to demand this goes here. And you're going to go, well, I'm a little worried about it becoming a church. It doesn't, that's the failure to understand. It's a church being a governmental entity is not the same thing as a government encouraging church. It's distinction, complete distinction between the two, at least as far as I perceived it here in the US. Because the US has never had a problem explicitly with churches taking up positions of power and then saying, well, now this church rules this entire district. That's not a problem here in the US. As I know that was a problem possibly during the medieval ages, but I think
it'd be a harder sell.
It is a hard sell, but now
in Europe, because of the connotations that it takes.
Yes. Which is why it's just important to have which is why it's important to simply have it as a talking point. We believe in a consistent worldview, and that worldview is driven by the word of God. Boom. Like, there you go. And you can't argue that. And you're sitting there going, okay, so I can't really argue that that's what we should be doing. So then you go, okay, well, I think we should start praying more. Right. And then, in sense, being the strong horse in the race, you can actually simply just state, for the US, we could actually still encourage people to go back to praying and actually doing the Pledge of Allegiance. Technically, it's not illegal and unconstitutional. It technically is not, because it's technically up to the states to allow whether or not that free speech is even authorized, right? Yeah. And certainly your argument for free speech, at least here for America, the argument for free speech could go, well, I'm not going to stand for it. Cool, you're going to be socially ostracized, right? But you could do that without us, arresting you and locking you up in the justice system, which seems to be the perversion of America right now.
Yeah, so I think this is where there's a difference, because in regards to Europe and how America, if you were to have a tactic or a strategy, or you were to do certain thing, the actual way that you do that in certain places is different.
Yes.
So obviously you can't do that sort of thing in the UK. Because you can technically have free speech so long as it doesn't. It's essentially like causing harm. So it's a public. So it'd be, so long as you're not causing a public order offense. But it's very nebulous about like how that
which is why Ralph talks about. Yeah, which is why Ralph talks about getting access to the positions of power first, because
Yes.
fundamentally at its core, it's the positions of power that are framing that. They frame
Yes.
they allow for the interpretation of that nebulous language. So
Yes.
whoever's actually in the position of power gets to make that. Well, we think you believing in communist ideals is actually disruptive to the public order, right?
Yes.
So now you don't actually get that speech. This is why Ralph is very key about getting access to the security space. This is why it's necessary for that path to power, because we don't have the social or the economic power anymore, because it doesn't actually have support from the space of security. So production and information don't have security.
It's also rotten as well.
Yeah.
It's also extremely rotten. If you talk about those as like their own separate structures, that they're basically buggered.
Yeah.
They are just completely rotten from the underneath and just don't function as they're supposed to function anyway. So it's completely irrelevant. In regards to Keo's question there about the system adapts to fractures and changes to culture and so survives by evolution. I wouldn't say that is what it's doing though, because it's a de-evolution. But that's a perspective, because if you have a moral framework of a transcendent being, you would see the system as it currently. It's not evolving into something else. It's not adapting. It's not doing what it's doing is it's devolving and changing things to try and keep itself in a position of authority.
Yes.
That's how I know what he's implying. He's implying
Yes.
it's to do with Kaz. I know it's to do with Kaz, which is the reason why he's brought it up.
Yes, it is. Because I mean, it is at its core, there is some elements of adaptation that are occurring, but the adaptations aren't exactly a moral good. They aren't really a moral good.
Destructive.
In a way, yes. Yeah. So it's not exactly a moral good. It's more of a consequential negative, I think, is the better way more elegant way of stating that term. But essentially it's the consequences of which are negative. So it's a consequential negative.
I think you also have the part as well, but there might be a material benefit to the things that are happening. So this goes into like the discussion we had before we hopped on here. It was to do with like industrial society and to do with what was the other article now? The Jacobin. It was Nick Land, to do with like population, essentially population, like birth rates and things like that. And then you've got the what was the other one?
Yeah, where I was talking about American automation and the failure to understand. Yeah, on GDP. Like, I'm so sick of hearing about GDP in the U.S. and the supposed value of things like rent, like renting an apartment is value, and I go, no, that's a utility. There's a distinct difference between a product and a utility, right?
Yeah.
Shelter is a utility, not a bloody product. So why is it our utilities are qualifying as part of American GDP?
Electricity. Well, I could only imagine that their entire reason is to bump the GDP up. It's to make it look like it's bigger than it is, but that means that means that you're artificially inflating it, which means that when eventually those utilities, if they start to fail, GDP goes down, and then you have like a housing crisis of like 2008 again. I know that's not how it actually works in a way. I know it's not, but
yeah, I don't presume to be an economics major, but I do know something's really wrong when you think like a 60% total rent, like when rent is part of financial services here in the United States, and that actually qualifies as an increase in GDP. That's a gross domestic product that's being provided every year, people paying rent. And I'm sitting there going, that's not right. Something doesn't sound right about that. And you can't convince me that something sounds right about that. You can't convince me that's normal.
That would fall under just a bit of a tongue in cheek. That would be an axiom then, isn't it? Because it's self-evidently true that just isn't right.
Yes. Right, something's not normal there. You can't sell me. I remember I was having an intense discussion with members of my church. They were like, "Yeah, it's a product," and I'm like, "No, it's not. No, you can't. I'm not sold there. I have to presume you don't understand it either. Like, I can't presume to understand it, so I have to assume you don't understand it either, because I can see it as a utility, not as a product, which is just like,
so. But
I don't get how that works.
But in regards to like the question Keo's asked here. Is again, it's not really a question, it's more of a statement. I should say evolution that needs disrupting and pointing in a more favorable direction. I
This
don't
is
think
what
that would be implying that you have the. This is a bit of a deeper one. That you have the ability to control the direction of where the culture actually goes, which means it's not organic. The culture is not organic, and going back to the first part, that means that you don't have a love that's organic.
Mhm,
That as it springs out, and you have like a position here that states, look, this is what you want to get to, but
mhm.
you've got to work your way there. So there's no
Yes.
organic level. There's no organic learning from the person in a relationship to get to that point to go, oh, that's what it means. That
Yeah.
the light bulb, the
There's no
eureka,
guidance.
the correct. But if you
There's no
did, if you
guidance.
but if you're trying to, well, there's no position, there's no standard to get to. If
Mhm.
you're having a, oh, I'm going to control this thing and grab it by the joystick like an
Yeah.
aircraft, you know what I mean? Something like with a joystick, you're directly trying to influence it in a certain. That would be classified as social engineering.
Yep. That would be artificial, right? So
That
it would
and
be.
it's what, in fact, that is exactly what's happening now.
Mhm.
Look
There
at
is
all
there is
the
artificial, yeah, there is artificial culture being generated here. It certainly throughout the West. The West has a lot of artificial culture being generated because it's about controlling the narrative, right? And controlling the message at its very core,
yeah.
unfortunately. And one of the interesting things is if you wanted an actual organic culture with axioms that ring true as opposed to axioms that become dogmatic because they no longer ring true, right? This is what cultural elements of the West are doing right now is they are flying in the face of reality and data. Data is saying one thing, and then they respond by artificially modifying the narrative to the falsehoods, right? To the lies, to the falsities.
Or by actually messing around with the data itself.
Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started about climate science. Oh man. I can go for a while about climate science.
But
That
it's
one
not-
pisses me off.
but it's just it's any sort of science. I mean, this would be a fantastic point again. I think this is again also outside. It's to do
This
with
would be another stream. This would be a good
yeah.
stream, actually,
This
is data
to do
data manipulation.
data manipulation, but it's also to do with that in itself indicates, excuse me, a failure in empiricism as a system. That is rather damning because the entire point, the entire idea of empiricism is that you're supposed to be able to falsify. That it works by falsification,
Hmm.
right? So if you can't falsify something, then it must be true.
Yes.
If you can't prove that it is false, then it has to be true. The problem is you can't even do that now because the data that you're using to actually prove if something is false
Is false.
the data, yeah, is in of itself false. It's fake. It's not even representing reality.
Correct.
This is where if you got into like arguments with anyone that's radical about LGBTQ, LGBT, whatever, if you get into discussions about them or feminism, right, as well,
Hmm.
they don't engage. The data sets that they engage with are completely different to ones that you might engage with, and then you get into an argument about, well, which data set is correct, and then you get into an argument about bias about who did the research, and so on and so on, and then and as a result, you're getting further and further and further away from the actual point of what is the data saying.
Yes.
So you're not even talking about the original subject. You're talking about something that's way because of the raw problem of the data doesn't reflect what's actually happening.
Hmm.
This is much like GDP in the UK. GDP is what 40,000-60,000 pounds a year per like capita or per person, essentially per household. I think it's done by.
Yeah.
I think the average modal wage is about 15,000 to 18,000 pounds a year. The majority of
That's
the
not a lot.
That's not no, it's not a lot. I think the average, and then but the averages don't line up completely. It's off top of my head. I could be wrong, right? The majority of the population earn under living wage, and living wage is £12 an hour. I think it might be 15 now. £15 you need per hour in the UK for a job to have a living wage, which means that you can own a house, a car, and pay your bills and eat.
Wow,
That's how
like
much. It's not a lot if you think about
no,
it. It's about $30 an hour.
huh?
Well, actually, it's more like 25, I think.
That's still arguably though better than the U.S. in a way. The U.S. it's like I think the average like for US is technically higher in dollars, but we also have a lot of extra services we pay for, so our actual take home is not that high.
Yeah. Well, the irony is that most people don't get paid living wage.
Yeah.
Most people get paid minimum wage, which is like
Yep.
half of that.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't
Yeah.
even. You're
And
not gonna get paid like a massive amount of money. You're gonna get paid the bare minimum for how old you are, because there's also
mhm.
like an age bracket. So like if you're
Yep.
16, you get £4 an hour. I'm not even joking. You get £4 an hour if you're 16. If you're doing your job and you're 16, £4 an hour. When you get to 18, it goes up to about 6.
That's incredible.
Right. Then when you're about 20, it goes up to around about 8-10 quid.
Wow.
So it's not a lot.
Huh.
It's bonkers when you think about it like that. But that again, that's the problem with the current power structure.
They aren't they're disingenuous. I always say that too. They're disingenuous because their data it's like we were talking about. The data just doesn't match the reality. The data doesn't match the reality.
Well, exactly. It's, if you then pair that with, but again, you can then again tie this back in. Love, lust. If you were to try and provide data points about those two areas,
Those two behaviors.
those two types of behavior, right? And you just remove any of the spiritual aspect, transcendental, moral positions on them. You just look at it materially. You can't even do that because the data's is just buggered. It doesn't work.
And that part of that is also a poor frame. There's a poor frame that fundamentally misconstrues the perception of those two behaviors, and then it construes them so the data can never possibly be right to begin with because of the misinterpretation of the language and the original intent of the two behaviors and their descriptions in the first place. So, and that's an unfortunate consequence, and that's part of the reason I really wanted to have the discussion. I thought it would be a fun discussion. I enjoy these kinds of things. I think I personally believe they do not get talked about enough, and when people do talk about them, they communicate it from a misinterpreted position. And they don't understand that they're not exactly being genuine about it either. The obvious case in point, celebrity marriages in the U.S. Where there was a very famous one, a famous American celebrity reality star married a basketball player, and then like within 72 hours had divorced the same basketball player.
Wow.
And you're sitting there going, what was all of that? Was that a publicity stunt? So you actually never really either loved or lusted. So you were just a liar. But
Yeah.
all of the media was this person is in love. This person is in love. And you're sitting there going, I don't think that word means what you think it means.
No.
I'm pretty certain you're not understanding what you're actually saying when you say that.
Or they just don't care.
They don't care. It's money. At the end of the day, for them, it's cash, and they don't care. So, all right. Well, that was about all I really had for the discussion. Thanks for joining me on this. If you ever wanted to join me for future discussions, I'm going to try and make more content myself. Did you have any last words for it? I think we kind of got off onto a good start there. I think it was pretty good.
Positive visions are difficult to come up with, and it takes time. And unfortunately, time is running out. But it's more so in a how would you say it? The time is running out in regards to what can be done before nothing can be done. I think that sums up. So I think positive visions. So obviously, conclusion, more so for the first bit, the entire point of love is that you're meant to overcome the sexual lust, and in some part, what you're wanting to do is if you use social media apps and things like that encourage that type of behavior, which they do,
Yes.
You need to just you have to remove them. It's not a case of, oh no, I'll just like pick and choose and like be very careful. It's like, no,
But
you can't just pick and choose. They are as they are designed to grab your eye and make you use them, even if you don't want to use them. So it's not worth having them.
it's not. But we also have to be careful in understanding that in order for us to genuinely grab a hold of power, we have to be able to drive narrative, which is why
Correct.
it's
Yes,
very
you do.
important to understand that we still need to have a space even within these social media apps that we don't want to use. The trick is, when we get power, what kind of positive visions can we use to steer the behavior and the algorithm of these apps to a position that we would like them to be, based on a genuine positive interpretation and understanding of the language we are attempting to use.
Well,
which is why we need to be sincere about it.
Yes, you do. You have to be sincere about it, but at the same time, you have to be steadfast, hard, and unwavering, like a mountain against a breeze. You can't shift.
Correct.
So much like, so in that case, you do have to. You would at first you would have to allow certain behavior that you don't like, just because of the way things are at the moment, on the understanding that you intend to eventually prevent it, get rid of it, or resolve it. So, but that does entails providing an out in some regards. You have an out for people that is in of itself positive behavior, but at the same time, you have to actually close off other doors.
True.
So, e.g., TikTok.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That gets that as a door, as a door.
Yeah.
Gets closed. That's
Closed.
closed. No, you're not allowed to do this anymore. It's like, no, but this in itself does also mean that you're going to be going into things that would, like your internet browsers, that can go around certain restrictions and things like that. You'd have to also deal with the people that deal in those and sell those sorts of things. And this is where it gets into it can get dark quite quickly.
Yes.
But this is the harsh reality of what might have to happen.
Yeah. Agreed.
But again, that all requires physical power first.
Yes. Yep. All right. That was actually really good. I actually enjoyed this one. This was a good discussion. Actually. Yeah, absolutely. It was pretty awesome. Thanks for joining me on this one. I appreciate it. So we're gonna wrap this one up right now. Okay. And I guess till next time. Good talk.
Ta-ra.
Yep.